Prepare for shock and awe. Gold, silver, copper, and zinc. This 30-cent a share company could be looking at life-changing gains. Even Resource Capital Inc., a $1 billion private equity fund made up of expert mining analysts and investors, just quietly took an 18% stake in the company. Learn more at futuremoneytrends.com/hardassets. All right, greetings and thank you for joining us at futuremoneytrends.com. I have a return guest, somebody who's got probably one of the most interesting websites online. It's a website, I want to say I heard about it a few years ago, and from time to time I've been checking it out, but when I interviewed him, gosh, I want to say 3 or 4 months now, it's been a regular site that I visit, and my guest today is Michael Rivero of whatreallyhappened.com. And just by the title and the domain, you can tell it's a very provocative and interesting website. What Really Happened. Michael, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Michael, I want to start with one of the hot topics over the last 7-8 days here, and that's the violence at Trump rallies. And I've read every single headline from the mainstream media, and basically it's always Trump rally violence, violence at Trump rally, and it's Trump, audience is violent, and it's all this. Basically the story is that the Trump people are violent. What the hell happened a week ago in Chicago and the day after? And is there any merit to Trump's people being violent, or is it the protesters?
It's the protesters, and more than that, it's a staged disruption. And we have MoveOn.org openly admitting they orchestrated and organized this. There were printed talking points lists found in the aftermath of Chicago for the anti-Trump protesters, what they were supposed to say, including directions for them to chant Bernie Sanders. And the indications are that this was actually a dirty trick by Hillary Clinton's campaign trying to disrupt Trump and at the same time trick Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders into a mudslinging contest against each other, which would harm both of them and help Hillary Clinton. And you need to remember that early in her career, Hillary Clinton worked on and was fired from the Watergate Committee investigating the crimes of Richard Nixon. And so she got a close-up look at all the dirty tricks Nixon's Committee to Re-elect the President pulled in his campaign for re-election against George McGovern. And so she's had a quality education, so to speak, on how to cheat her way into power, and we're seeing virtually a replay in which she wants to get Trump out of the GOP nomination in order that the Republicans will nominate somebody that she can beat very, very easily, which is probably going to be Ted Cruz, although we're now hearing talk that the GOP leadership is going to completely abandon the rules and promote either Mitt Romney or Paul Ryan as the nominee, even though neither one of those went through the primary process. And now we have one of the delegates, Curly Hoagland, I think he's from North Dakota, was interviewed on TV saying the voters don't get to pick the candidates, the party leadership gets to pick the candidates. In fact, I don't even know why we bother having primaries and caucuses.
That is horrible when you think about the millions, tens of millions of people that have come out to vote. I do want to get more into the election, but on these protesters, last night I was watching John Kasich give his speech. I just wanted to see what he was going to say. I mean, I was kind of surprised he'd do a victory lap winning his own state. But there was a protester in the audience, and I was like, that's interesting. And then the protester happened to be wearing a red Make America Great hat again. And I almost wonder, because haven't we seen this before where it's not really a Trump supporter, it's not really a Tea Party person. These people show up in Nazi outfits, they're disruptors, but then later on they're found out to be tied to communist and socialist organizations, right?
Well, basically, they're there for hire. It's a rent-a-mob. And as a matter of fact, what was interesting is in the aftermath of Chicago, people spotted in Craigslist ads for paid positions to come on down and be a disruptor at the Trump rally. I mean, this is a bought and paid for situation. The guy who jumped the barricade in Dayton, turns out he's an actor. He has a page at the Internet Movie Database, and he has a long history of just being conveniently there with dramatic protests against the American flag for the media cameras. So we're basically dealing with a theater production to try and convince us that Trump's people are really, really bad. And I'm not saying that all of Trump's people are good, But basically, this is a classic tactic of going on out, causing violence at a rally, and then blaming the person whose rally it was. And if you studied the history of the rise of the Nazis, the Hitler's people did exactly the same thing. The brown shirts had a specialty. They would go out to the rallies of Hitler's political opposition. They would cause violence and a ruckus to basically scare people away. And that was how Hitler was able to seize power. Then, of course, he turned around and killed his own brown shirts so that nobody would find out what he'd been doing.
You had touched on it on the first question, the first answer, and that is, look, the Trump has got this, millions and millions. I think almost 2.5 million people more votes than Ted Cruz, which is second. Can they really steal this? Are they really intending? I mean, this seems like it would absolutely blow up the Republican Party, and possibly, my goodness, you might have rioting in the streets, because you're talking about disenfranchising many, many middle-class workers.
Absolutely. We're hearing that all over the place. We have got some of the leaders of the Republican Party out there saying that they would rather have Hillary in the White House next year than Donald Trump. They are that afraid of him. He is an outsider. He's not a professional career politician. Newt Gingrich was joking around. Trump hasn't been through the secret initiations. He hasn't been inside the club. And the threat for the establishment is the fact that Donald Trump has his own money. He can't be bought. He won't be controlled. And they see that as a real threat to this little elitist clique they've had in power for generation after generation of either Bush or Clinton. And the White House is not supposed to be an hereditary throne passed back between two dynastic ruling families. And that's why Trump really has become a serious threat to them. And I think there's a concern. They've been trying to use all the Ron Paul tactics to get him out, like they did against Ron Paul in 2008 and 2012. It's not working because the people are recognizing, again, this kind of dirty play. And we have to be open to the possibility that they may try and take him out the way they took out Robert Kennedy. If he gets to be that much of a threat. So I hope Trump's security is on the spot and he's wearing this Kevlar undies. We do know he is wearing a bulletproof vest for some of his events, so they know there's a danger out there. But yeah, the Republican leadership is already talking about simply changing the rules at the convention to nominate Mitt Romney or Paul Ryan. They're going to throw out their own rule number 40, which says that no candidate can be considered for nominee without at least 8 states in the primary, and neither Romney nor Ryan have even run in the primaries. And so that's why you have this Curly Hoagland out there saying, well, we don't really need the primaries. The party leadership will choose the candidates. And, of course, that's not how America runs. It's never how it's supposed to be run. My concern about your comment, the Republican Party could destroy itself. There's a similar angst over in the Democrats, and if both parties were to blow up and open the door to a new multi-party world, that would be okay. But my worst fear is the GOP will self-destruct and leave the United States with a single political party in charge of the government, just like the former Soviet Union. And if you ask anybody who survived those dark days under the USSR, it was not very pleasant living under one-party leadership.
Yeah, that's a very scary thought. And it is almost one party with the two wings, right? I mean, as far as governing, they pretty much vote for the same wars. As Ron Paul used to say, there's a lot of consensus when it comes to the empire building and the deficit spending. Michael, I wanted to ask you about the cashless society. And the ban on certain higher denominated notes. What are you seeing and what are you reporting on this front right here? Is this something that, now that we're seeing it on mainstream press, is this something they're kind of accelerating?
Yeah, it is accelerating, and they're really rushing forward because more and more people are suddenly becoming aware of this negative interest rate phenomenon. Now, I'm an old guy. When I was a kid and you had a savings account in the bank, the money would grow. Now we're being told that if we have a savings account in the bank, we can expect the bank to shave off a little bit of that money every month for the privilege of having our money in a savings account. So a lot of people are thinking, well, why should I have a savings account? I'm better off keeping my cash here at home, buried in a mayonnaise jar out by the pineapple plantation. And so they need to find some way to stop that. They literally need to trap your wealth inside their system where they can help themselves to it whenever they feel they have a justification to do it. And if they succeed in this cashless society, there will also be a ban on private ownership of silver, and gold investment coins and bars, because any portable store of wealth that's outside the control of the bankers and the U.S. government is a threat to maintaining this little Ponzi scheme banking system that we've been living under for all these decades. And it is hovering at the edge of collapse. Some of the things that they're doing are downright criminal. We have J.P. Morgan, Citigroup, and Goldman Sachs are taking these bad derivatives off of Deutsche Bank to keep Deutsche Bank from collapsing, and they're bringing them into the U.S. under the protection of the FDIC, which means when these derivatives implode, they're going to drop the bill on the American taxpayer. And it's always about protecting the banks and protecting the money and dropping the losses on the people, and that is the classic definition of economic fascism.
Yeah, for protection, a lot of people around the world, I mean, there's a massive surge in gold and silver buying. Where do you see gold and silver in 2016?
Well, it's hard to prognosticate on that. I mean, if normal market forces were at work, we would see gold and silver going through the roof already as trustworthy stores of value compared to the ink and paper currencies, especially the U.S. dollar. But we're seeing massive evidence of manipulation of gold and silver prices to keep them down, to discourage people from pulling their money out of the savings account, to discourage people from pulling their money out of the stock market. And so they're using these paper contracts. They're just printing them up like crazy and blending the price of the paper contract with the physical metal to keep the overall price down. This is very, very dishonest, because right now the paper gold contracts are leveraged over the physical gold hundreds to one. No legitimate commodity business would ever be allowed to get away with that kind of leveraging, but it's being tolerated here because they're desperate to keep gold and silver prices down. But at some point, they're not going to be able to keep this up. And when gold and silver finally break free, they are going to go through the roof, in my opinion.
Michael, are the insiders, are there any signs for the general stock market indexes that like before 9/11 and like in 2008, where the insiders are kind of backing off this thing, maybe even doing some selling?
Well, we're actually seeing the stock market being kept up by a lot of corporations buying their own stock back in order to reduce exposure. They're doing it with borrowed money, however, and I think what we're seeing behind the scenes is that people are trying to pay off obligations that are covered by credit default swaps and move those debts into obligations not covered by credit default swaps. So when it comes apart, they conduct the derivatives explosion, which is the real threat to the global economy. But in the end, ordinary people are going to be cheated by whatever mechanism they come up with, because you need to understand these private central banks, whether it's Deutsche Bank, the European Central Bank, the Federal Reserve, Bank of England, and so forth, they don't exist to serve the nation and their people. They exist to serve themselves and their owners. And they are completely unconcerned with the quality of life or the welfare of ordinary people. The people are just there to be made money off of, and if they can't make money off of you, well, then you're of no use to them. And what's really alarming, of course, is this constant pattern of bankers driving the rush to war, because wars are the bankers' richest harvest of debt, and they don't even care which side wins or loses. That's why you had Brown Brothers Harriman in New York financing Adolf Hitler's rise to power. They love war. The way it works, because of private central banking's design flaw of generating more debt than money with which to pay the debt, the system works like this. The instant that first pretty printed piece of paper goes into circulation, more money is owed to the central bank than actually exists. And that is the trap. And as they bring new borrowers in to allow the creation of new money, the debt goes up faster than the available money supply. Then you reach a point where the people can't refuse to borrow anymore because they're under too much debt, and the Keynesians come on in and demand government borrow to keep the system going. So government starts borrowing on behalf of the people, and I might add, without their permission, until you reach a point where the government can't borrow anymore, which is where the U.S. is right now. It's at that point they kick off a major war to force everybody further into debt to fight the war. When the war is over, they have to borrow more to rebuild from the war, and when this horrible cycle is all over, ordinary people like you and I have pretty much what we had before, except the graveyards are a lot bigger, and we're back into debt slavery to the private central banks for another 100 years. And it is a repeating pattern. Every time the U.S. gets into these financial messes, they get into a world war, if not to get out of them, at least to distract from them. Crash of 1907, World War I. Crash of 1929, World War II. crash of 2008, and look how many countries the U.S. has invaded or overthrown or drone struck in the intervening years. And now they're talking openly about war with Russia and China to remove the threat of the ruble and the yuan to the U.S. paper dollar.
So do you think World War III itself could be possibly imminent here, and possibly starting out of Syria or Ukraine?
I think future history books are going to look back and say we were already into World War III at the start of 2016. We're just waiting for a big bang like a Pearl Harbor or the USS Maine in Havana Harbor, where everybody says, oh yeah, all these little wars all over the place, I guess it really is a world war and we're off and running. The problem is that the United States has exhausted its military supplies over 13 years of war on all these countries and having to go back in over and over again to support their puppet regimes. And I do not think the United States is capable of winning a conventional war against Russia and or China, and that means that we're going to see a nuclear exchange before this is all over, and we might not even win then.
Well, I certainly, and I'm sure you agree, I certainly hope we don't see that. A nuclear war would be really an endgame scenario, possibly for humanity itself.
It would be. I've got a first strike target right out my office window to my left here. It's called Pearl Harbor.
Well, Mr. Rivero, thank you so much for your time again, everybody. WhatReallyHappened.com. I know everybody thoroughly enjoyed this interview. Just listening to Michael for the past 3 minutes here talk about world and geopolitical politics. That's probably my favorite part about going to his website. Definitely the website to check. It's unlike any other. So, I mean, if you go to Drudge and CNN, you go to my site, Future Money Trends. Look, I want you to get unique perspective and information that's not out there, and you're going to go to whatreallyhappened.com and you're going to get it. So make sure you bookmark that site. Michael, thank you so much for your time, and I hope to talk to you maybe in a few weeks or a month.
I look forward to it.